That's one of the things structurally that's going on. It's actually structured like something called a Sierpinski gasket, which is a very primitive kind of pyramidical fractal. Although what was structured as a Sierpinski gasket was the first was the draft that I delivered to Michael in '94, and it went through some, I think, mercy cuts. So it's probably kind of a lopsided Sierpinski gasket now. But it's interesting. That's one of the structural ways that it's supposed to kind of come together. It's kind of a design that a man named Sierpinski, I believe, developed. It was quite a bit before the introduction of fractals, and before any of the kind of technologies that fractals are a really useful metaphor for. But it looks basically like a pyramid on acid, with certain interconnections between parts of them that are visually kind of astonishing, and then the mathematical explanations of them are interesting. I know that when I was a young writer, I would play endless sort of structural games that I think, in retrospect, were mostly for myself alone and didn't much care. I don't really... I mean, Infinite Jest is trying to do a whole bunch of different things at once, and it doesn't make much difference to me whether somebody... I mean, I would expect that somebody who's a mathematician or a logician or an ACS guy might be interested in some of the fractal structures of it. For me, I mean, a lot of the motivation had to do with, it seems to me that so much of premillennial life in America consists of enormous amounts of what seem like discrete bits of information coming, and that the real kind of intellectual adventure is finding ways to relate them to each other and to find larger patterns and meanings, which of course is essentially narrative, but that structurally it's a bit different. And since fractals are a more kind of, oh Lord, since its chaos is more on the surface, sort of its bones or its beauty a little bit more, that it would be a more interesting way to structure the thing. Okay, now I'm meandering, but I know that I know that for doing something this long, a fair amount of the structural stuff is for me, because it's kind of like, pitons in the mountainside. I mean, it's ways for me to stay oriented and engaged and get through it. I don't think I would impose weird structures on the reader the way I would have, say, 10 years ago. Yeah, I mean, this is the great nightmare when you're doing something long and hard, is you're terrified that it will be perceived as gratuitously hard and difficult, that this is some, avant-garde for its own sake sort of exercise. And having done some of that stuff, I think, earlier in my career, I was really scared about it. That the trick of this, I've got this whole rant about, I think a lot of avant-garde fiction and, serious literary fiction that bitches and moans about, readers' defection, and blaming it all on TV. A lot of the avant-garde has forgotten that part of its job is to seduce the reader into being willing to do the hard work. And so doing something like this, there were a lot of fears, and one of them was, oh no, this doesn't make any sense. Another was, oh no, this is going to come off as gratuitously long or gratuitously hard. And I don't know, it makes me happy you said that, because I worked harder on this than anything I've ever done in my life, and there's nothing in there by accident. And there have already been some readers and reviewers that see it as kind of a mess and as kind of random, and I just have to sort of shrug my shoulders. Fiction's got a very weird and complicated job, because part of its job is to teach the reader, communicate with the reader, establish some sort of relationship with the reader where the reader is willing on a neurological level to expend effort to look hard enough at the jellyfish to see that it's pretty. And that kind of effort is very hard to talk about, and it's real scary because you can't be sure whether you've done it or not. And it's what makes you sort of clutch your heart when somebody says, I really like this, it didn't strike me as gratuitous, because that's, of course, your great hope when you're doing it. I guess when I was in my 20s, like deep down underneath all the bullshit, what I really believed was that the point of fiction was to show that the writer was really smart. And it sounds terrible to say, but I think, looking back, that's what was going on. And I don't think I really understood what loneliness was when I was a young man. And now I've got a much less clear idea of what the point of art is, but I think it's got something to do with loneliness and something to do with setting up a conversation between human beings. And I know that when I started this book, I had very vague and not very ambitious ambitions, and one was I wanted to do something really sad. I'd done comedy before. I wanted to do something really sad, and I wanted to do something about what was sad about America. And there's a fair amount of weird and hard technical stuff going on in this book, but I mean, one reason why I'm willing to go around and talk to people about it, and that I'm sort of proud of it in a way I haven't been about earlier stuff, is that I feel like whatever's hard in the book is in service of something that, at least for me, is good and important. And it's embarrassing to talk about because I think it sounds kind of cheesy. I sort of think, like, all the way down kind of to my butthole, I was a different person coming up with this book than I was about my earlier stuff. And I'm not saying my earlier stuff was all crap, but it's just, it seems like, I think when you're very young and until you've sort of, faced various darknesses, it's very difficult to understand how precious and rare the sort of thing that art can do is. I mean, the thing that makes me nervous talking about this is, so far it seems as if people think it really is sort of a book about drug addiction and recovery, and intentional fallacies notwithstanding. I mean, what was really going on in my head was something more general, like what you were talking about before. That there is that some of the sadness that it seems to me kind of infuses the culture right now has to do with this loss of a sense of purpose or organizing principles, something you're willing to give yourself away to, basically, and that the addictive impulse, which is very much kind of in the cultural air right now, is interesting and powerful only because it's a kind of obvious distortion of kind of a religious impulse or an impulse to be part of something bigger. And the stuff at the Academy is kind of weird because, yeah, it's very high tech and it's very become technically better so that you can achieve X, Y, and Z. But also, the guy who essentially runs the Academy now is a fascist, and whether it comes out or not, he's really the only one there who, to me, is saying anything that's even remotely non-horrifying, except it is horrifying because he's a fascist. And part of the stuff that was rattling around in my head when I was doing this is that it seems to me that one of the scary things about sort of the nihilism of contemporary culture is that we're really setting ourselves up for fascism, because as we empty more and more kind of values, motivating principles, spiritual principles almost, out of the culture, we're creating a hunger that eventually is going to drive us to the sort of state where we may accept fascism, just because the nice thing about fascists is they'll tell you what to think, they'll tell you what to do, they'll tell you what's important, and we as a culture aren't doing that for ourselves yet. I know this is somewhat digressive, but that was the only thing that it seemed to me you were missing in the thing about the Academy. Is there's an embedded fascist whose status is really ambivalent, because he's a horrifying figure, but he's also, to me, the only figure there who isn't completely insane in terms of his approach to at least sports. I think one of the great ironies is, I've been to a few different churches, I've been to a few different things. The one place, when I was researching this book, the one place where I saw the kind of stuff that seemed to me at the time anyway to be important talked about was AA. The great irony is that AA's got this thing called the 12 Traditions, the 11th of which is that any member of AA can't identify themselves on the level of press, radio, and film, which means, really technically, somebody to write a book like this that's got a lot of AA in it, you can't be an AA member, which is one reason why it was very lucky that the city that I was doing the research in, Boston, like 75% of its meetings were open. So you could just totter in off the street, fork over a buck, and kind of settle back. And anyway, I think it's hard to talk smartly about it. It seems to me that most of the stuff in my own life and in my friend's life that's interesting and true involves double binds or setups where you're given two alternatives, each which are mutually exclusive, and the sacrifices involved in either seem unacceptable. I mean, one of the big ones is the culture places a huge premium on achievement. I mean, I went to like this real hoity-toity college, and and everybody's like now a millionaire on Wall Street. Anyway, how both to work hard enough and invest enough of yourself really to achieve something, and yet retain the sort of integrity so that you've got a self apart from your achievement. I mean, even something as banal as the modern woman can have it all. She can have a family and a deep, fulfilling relationship with her children while being, a CEO of a successful company. I mean, it's as if the culture is some Zen teacher, whacking us no matter what we do. It's very interesting. It's designed to be a book. I mean, this is probably a little pretentious to write a book this long and have it be designed to be read more than once. That for me wasn't the thing that was really hard and really scary. The really hard and really scary thing was trying to make it fun enough so somebody would want to.